It's Ask GCN Anything, a fairly self-explanatory title, but if you've never watched one before, this is your chance to ask us your cycling-related questions, and we'll do our best to give some kind of expert answer. Two ways to ask those questions. Firstly, on social media using the hashtag Torqueback, or you can leave them in the comment section just down below. And if you'd like to be in with a chance of winning 3 months free subscription to Zwift, use the hashtag AskGCNTraining.
That's right, and this week we're going to answer questions on aero helmets, sweet spot, and how to deal with rogue dogs.
Yes, so let's get the important one out of the way straight away. Rogue dogs. This is a question that came in from Schnooks33. He and his dad were riding together down a shared path. Up ahead, we saw 2 dogs on a leash with a woman, and not really knowing what to do, we decided to give them lots of room and pass politely without announcing. Without any warning or time to react, one of the dogs slipped out of the collar and ran right in front of us, barking like mad, and both my dad and I ran over the small dog. My dad was especially beaten up along with his bike, but the dog was my real concern. It looked like it was in bad shape, and I felt quite guilty after this encounter. So here's my question. What is proper etiquette when passing other path users on a shared path, and what should you do when dogs are thrown into the equation?
Well, firstly, I hope your dad's all right, and I hope your dog's all right. It sounds horrible.
Sound nasty.
But as someone who rides regularly on shared paths as well, I think the best thing to assume on a shared path is that you have equal rights with the other people on the path, irrespective of what they're doing, and you should slow down significantly when passing other people, especially when there's animals involved, because they can act in an unpredictable way.
Yeah. Squirrels particularly, I find. There's no way of predicting where they're going to go. But as you mentioned, you should definitely slow down, particularly as a cyclist on a shared path, you're the one that's going to be going the fastest and therefore could do the most damage. So just slow right down.
I feel that you need to think about how you feel as a cyclist when you have a close pass from a car, and it's quite unnerving and makes you feel uncomfortable. And if you're a pedestrian or a runner on a shared path and a bike comes past at speed, quite close, it's the same kind of thing. It feels unnerving. So I would say just treat people as you wish to be treated yourself.
Exactly, yeah. And there's no harm with giving a bit of a shout or warning that you are about to overtake, just so that they are aware that you're coming up from behind. I've actually got my own dog-related story from 24 years ago when I first started cycling. I was a mountain biker, but in order to get to the mountain bike paths, I had to go from my place in Bransgall, the village where I grew up, past another village called Thorney Hill on the outskirts of New Forest. And up there was this one dog that every time I rode past would come running out, yapping and try to chomp at my feet. It was a reasonably big dog as well. One day I was going in the other direction, which meant I was on the other side of the road from the houses where this dog lived. Still came running out, crossed traffic, and there was a car coming the other way and it got run over. I never had to deal with that rogue dog again, but I did also feel quite bad. But at the same time, there was nothing I could do about that. Anyway, we'll move quickly on from the rogue dog stories to something else.
That's awful.
I know, yeah. And I didn't tell you this before we started recording, so that's the first who's heard of it. Next up, we have got a question on sweet spot from Daniel S. Why is sweet spot beneficial to FTP? In my mind, if you want to produce more power for longer periods of time, then you should attempt to ride at X% over FTP for as long as you can until that becomes your new functional threshold power. Rinse and repeat. Why doesn't that work?
Well, Daniel, you're not far wrong per se, but let's start with the fact that almost all training is developed for and devised for professional athletes before it then kind of trickles down to us mortals.
Yeah, I think you need to think of this as a sort of the fact that the levels of training that you're riding at are more of a continuum. There's no sort of set start, stop on these sorts of things actually. And to demonstrate this, or to illustrate this, I think we should use this graph from one of my former coaches, Hunter Allen, he of Training Peaks fame, in that there are still benefits to your FTP if you ride above it, but when you take into consideration the stress, mental and physical of doing that, they are less than the riding below it.
Yeah, hence the phrase sweet spot. It's regarded as the tipping point between the return for effort and time. You kind of get the biggest bang for your buck doing sweet spot because you can do more of it, and you can do it on back-to-back days more easily so than if you were doing efforts above FTP, which it's very hard to do that back-to-back days and recover adequately to do it again.
I certainly saw huge gains personally when I started doing a lot of sweet spot for the first time.
Me too.
Anyway, it's time to throw to a video from many moons ago. Coming up is Cy Richardson along with Alexis Ryan showing you tips on how to improve your FTP.
sweet spot intervals were where I made some of my biggest improvements in the years just after I got a power meter. It refers to a level just a little bit below threshold, so it's hard, but it's not so hard that you can't do a number of sessions per week and still allow your body to recover, adapt, and then go again.
You can vary these sessions by doing intervals of different lengths, generally over 15 minutes, and you can also vary the types of terrain that you use to do them. These sweet spot efforts are often described as the best bang for your buck, and they offer the best physiological response for the time you put in the saddle.
It's time to announce the winner of 3 months free subscription to Zwift. That winner on this occasion is Adam Newell. Hashtag Ask GCN Training. I'd like to know how I improve my acceleration when I am sprinting.
I want to know as well.
Well, we both do. Unfortunately for you, Adam, our resident expert sprinter, Chris Opie, isn't in the office today, so you are left with can we even say mediocre? 2 slightly below average sprinters to answer the question as best we can. But we have been doing some research in the scientific community, so hopefully this will give you some tips.
Yeah, it's often thought that to improve one's sprinting ability, you need to do a lot of sort of, high power anaerobic work. But that's not necessarily the case.
No, and that's why it's really important to know what your muscle fibre makeup is. Because, for example, if you are predominantly slow twitch muscle fibres, you're not actually going to respond that well to high intensity interval training, i.e. the high torque efforts that you might do.
Yeah, and a common mistake is that if you have a large proportion of slow twitch muscle fibres, doing the sort of high torque anaerobic work can actually be detrimental to your performance.
Yeah, which sounds a bit backwards, doesn't it? But bear with us. Unfortunately, you don't need to go for a muscle biopsy to find out whether you're a slow twitch or a fast twitch kind of person. All you need to do is look at your critical power curve, and you will be able to find that on Zwift. So if what you can see is that it's really high from 1 second to about 20 seconds, it drops off like a cliff and then levels out, then the likelihood is you're a sprinter, and that means you've got a lot of fast twitch muscle fibres. If, on the other hand, from the top, it just goes steadily down like this and flattens out gradually, then you're probably more of an endurance monster with more slow twitch muscle fibres.
Yeah, and once you've determined what you think your muscle fibre makeup is, then you can tailor your training to that. So if you think that you've got high fast twitch muscle fibres, then you should be doing those sort of high torque anaerobic sessions and things like standing starts, for example, and low cadence drills and things like that.
So as an example, you could head out on a training session where you include 5 standing start sprints. Now you want to choose a gear which is pretty tough to get going, because that will then require you to not only produce a high amount of power to get it going, but also a high amount of torque. Then the aim is to sprint as hard as you possibly can until you've reached your maximum cadence, at which point you can stop. Between each one of those, it's important to get a really long recovery, i.e. around about 10 minutes.
Yeah, or alternatively, you could perform some low cadence intervals on a climb. So you do a minute at 110 or well over 110% of your FTP at about 60 RPM, and then follow that with a minute of recovery at an easier, higher cadence. Repeat this 5 times and then try and work your way up to doing 10 of those.
On the other hand, if, like Ollie and myself, you have more slow twitch muscle fibres and you're looking to improve your sprint, listen to this advice, Ollie. Apparently, according to the latest research, you want to do a higher volume of slightly longer duration, high effort sprints. So anything from 30 seconds to 2 minutes. And with these, you want a 2-to-1 ratio when it comes to your recovery. So twice the length of recovery as the interval itself.
Yeah, and finally, if you're really concerned about improving your sprinting power and your sprinting performance, then you should also think about avoiding other types of riding and training, which is going to be detrimental to that. So long endurance rides can be fun, but they can also take the edge off your sprinting and your ability to train your sprint when you're doing those sessions.
You always get your best power when you're really fresh, don't you?
Yeah.
Hence why big track sprinters, or one of the reasons why big track sprinters have a much higher power than road sprinters, because road sprinters need to do that endurance training to get to the finish of a road race in the first place. Finally, before we finish with this one, the other thing that you need to consider in this equation is science, really, isn't it? And physics, because mass is something that's really going to affect how fast any object is able to accelerate. So if you've got any timber to shed, consider doing that, because if you keep the same power, you'll accelerate faster. That said, Opie's a lot heavier than both Ollie and I, and he's going to beat us in the sprint every day of the week, isn't he? So unless we get down to about 31, 32 kilos each, that's not going to change.
The next question is from Quinn Hughes, who asks, What is a good way to get back into cycling after a couple of months off?
Well, I had this myself recently. I dove straight in at the deep end, basically, doing lots of intense work on the turbo training each week. But I think ideally, you want to just start fairly steadily, don't you? Not dive straight back in at full intensity. 2 to 4 steady rides per week that are also reasonably short will allow you to sort of just gauge how you're feeling, really, before you then start to ramp things back up a little bit.
Yeah, and after 2 weeks with 3 to 4 steady rides, I think then would be a good time to start introducing some intensity to that, and also the length of your rides as well.
It sort of depends, doesn't it, why you've had that time off in the first place. If it's simply because you fell out of love with the bike, then you want to try and introduce aspects which is why you fell in love with bike riding in the first place. If you've been injured and forced off the bike, then you want to take things really careful and just make sure you don't get yourself injured again. We did, though, do a video on this very subject a few years back, myself and Si, explaining how to get back on your bike after an extended period off.
When you get back on, forget what you were able to do before and just take things slowly.
Yeah, so if the last ride you did before you hung up your wheels was 100 miles at 25 miles an hour, you might want to lower your expectations and then build up gradually. And then also that way you get that wonderful sense of progression as you start to improve again.
Penultimate question comes in from Tom Jameson. I'm doing the Fred Whitten in May this year, and I'm struggling to find the time to do the 5-hour plus training ride, which I'd like to do in my preparation. So do you have any advice that will help me to prepare for a long hilly ride when the longest time I have for a training ride is about 3 hours?
Well, one of my favourite events, this.
I know. Ollie put this question in, he loves it.
I won't be doing it this year, unfortunately, because we're going to the Giro the first week of that. Yeah,
so we can't. Yeah, such a hard life, isn't it? Can't do the Fred Whitten challenge because we've got to go to Italy for the Giro d'Italia.
Yeah. My younger brother's going to be there, so keep an eye out for him. But yeah, I mean, consistency. He's better than me.
but is he a sprinter?
Well, he's better than me.
Right, anyway, get on with the question.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest challenge for the Fred Whitten is the severity and number of the climbs that are in it. So I would suggest trying to do VO2 max intervals, typically 5 to 12 minutes long, so that you have, over your threshold power, so that you have the engine to get over those climbs. You can either do those as an interval session on the turbo, or you could build them into one of your sort of 3-hour rides that you mentioned there.
Yeah, I don't think there's any reason to despair these days if you aren't able to put in 5-hour plus rides, 4 or 5 to 6 hour sportive, because it's been proven time and time again recently that you can get a lot of endurance from doing some pretty short rides. The important thing, as ever with this kind of thing, is that you are consistent. So if you do only have time to do 1 hour at a time, make sure you're doing that 4 to 5 times per week, and that will pay off in dividends on the day. Yeah. The next question comes in from Mr. Wu, #Torqueback. I'm about to buy a new helmet, and I don't know whether to buy an Aero helmet or not. Do you have any recommendations about Aero helmets that you can give me? I'd be happy about any advice about a specific model that you would recommend. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think ultimately it comes down to ventilation. Aero helmets do offer a measurable benefit in terms of drag reduction. This has been shown time and time again, and consequently I wear one most of the time.
Even in the office.
Yeah, especially when racing or walking to the shops. But the weight penalty of an Aero helmet is minimal, and it's definitely offset by the drag saving, but they can be a little bit warmer. So it depends where you ride. In the UK, it's pretty chilly most of the time, so it doesn't really matter. But I find that if it's over 30 degrees, I can get a little bit hot in a non-vent, a helmet with less vents. So I'd probably go for a climbing helmet. But I don't know. That said, if I was only going to own one helmet, I'd probably go for an Aero one.
Yeah, an Aero road one.
Yeah.
I wonder if you're talking about Aero time trial helmets or road helmets here, because the thing with the time trial helmets is that they're individual to a particular person's shape, aren't they? A little bit like the fastest front wheel and the fastest fork when put together don't necessarily make the fastest combination. You can take the fastest helmet in the wind tunnel, put it on somebody's head, it'll work very well, put it on somebody else's, and there'll be a different helmet that's even faster than that. So unfortunately, that you're either going to have to go to a wind tunnel to find out, or do some on-the-road testing, which is something we should get around to explaining how to do.
Yeah,
at some
that'd be
point.
cool.
The Chung method. Anyway, not time for that this week because that is the end of our... Oh, it's not! We've got one more question.
Yeah.
Sorry, it comes in from Stephen Tubble. Why is it so rare to see riders switch helmet? Another helmet question. Switch helmets after crashing in a race. If they're good to carry on racing, i.e. no major injuries, surely it's in their best interest to get a new helmet from the team car in case the original has been damaged in the collision, which is a very good point.
But you know what? I mean, it sounds blindingly obvious now he's mentioned it in a comment, but I hadn't actually ever thought of that before.
No, I haven't either.
Yeah, but I think one of the reasons is that, well, when riders crash, it's very rare, fortunately, that they actually do bang their heads. We do see it sometimes, but often they damage other parts of their body. But the spare helmets generally aren't kept in the team cars, are they?
I don't remember. We've got spare everything else, shoes and all the kit you can imagine in your bag in the back of the car, but there aren't generally any, or at least many helmets in there. But that's a very good point. We might suggest it to the teams when we go out to the Giro d'Italia, avoiding the Fred Whitten challenge in the process. I don't know the answer to that, so we probably shouldn't have included this question in Ask GCN Anything this week before doing some more research.
I think the one thing we can say is that if you do break your helmet in a crash as a professional or non-professional or whatever, then you probably shouldn't be carrying on with the race or event you're doing.
And that is something that cycling is doing reasonably well now, the whole concussion thing, because in the past everyone just got back on their bike as soon as they could, even if they were completely out of it. Tom Scoyne, you remember from the Tour of California a couple of years ago. But the teams and the doctors are now really on this. And Ian Boswell, for example, recently at Tirreno Adriatico has gone home and they've been really looking after him well after suffering from some concussion. And actually we wish him all the best in his recovery and a return to racing soon. But good to see that development in the world of cycling, I have to say. I think that's the end. That was indeed the last question. He hasn't put any more sneaky ones at the bottom of the script here, so we shall shortly say goodbye. But before we do, a reminder of how to get in touch with next week's questions. 2 ways to do it: on social media with the hashtag Torqueback, or in the comments section down below. And don't forget, if you want to put yourself in with a chance of winning that subscription to Zwift, the hashtag then is Ask GCN Training.
Yeah, if you've enjoyed this video, then please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the GCN channel if you haven't already. And, well, for another video, why not check out, seeing as we're talking about helmets and safety, the Bell Test Lab.
Oh yeah, good idea.
Yeah.
Si went over there a year or two ago, didn't he? You can find that just down here.